Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank. This is episode number 9. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be one of your hosts for today, and joining me, we've got both of the boys on the line. We've been chatting for a little bit, but how you doing, fellows? Teld, Chris, how's it going?
It's going all right.
Hungover.
I am not.
Well, I hope not too hungover to sit here and talk about everyone's favorite Magic the Gathering set coming to Arena.
Saying this unironically for once.
Yes, yeah, like literally one of people's favorite Magic the Gathering sets of all time. We're going to be talking about Khans of Tarkir, and the impetus for talking about this is that it is coming to Arena, I believe just completely unadulterated. I think they're not giving us a remaster or anything like that. According to things that I've read, it's just going to be the original Khans of Tarkir set by itself with all of the normal cards included, which is very exciting for people who, A, have never drafted the set, and B, people who have drafted the set, so I guess everybody. But we're going to be talking about, just waxing philosophical about Khans for a little bit, but also the impact that Khans of Tarkir has had on Cube, and its kind of legacy in Cube, which, spoiler alert, not much going on with Khans these days. It turns out 10 years of power creep will leave a set from 2014 in the dust a little bit, but we're going to get into that, why that is, what's, beloved about Khans, what it introduced, and its long-standing impact on Cube. Before we do that, do want to go ahead and mention that wherever you are listening to this podcast, there will be links to our Discord. I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but we just hit our 700th member last night. I think actually 701 as of this morning.
Nice.
And
nice.
700 people, 700 Jank divers hanging out.
It's been a pretty steady income, like on a daily basis for weeks and weeks now. And I have to imagine, because there was definitely a slowdown there for a minute. I have to imagine that's related to the draft sim spot, because I figured after that went up we'd see like an uptick for a little bit, but it kind of just hasn't stopped.
Two things to credit there. First off, we did have an episode with Lucky Paper Magic, and that got us a lot of notoriety, I think, with that episode, which, by the way, we need to contact those guys and see if they ever want to come on this show. And then, two, I do love that you plugged Draft Sim for me, the website that I write for, but
it's Draftmancer.
I think you meant draftmancer.com is, I think, what he was
It is. Yeah.
But hey, you know what? If Draft Sim, if the people I write for are pulling in people to the Jank Diver gaming community, that's great too. But yeah, 700 Jank Divers, thanks to everybody who's here and anyone who's listening from the community. And if you are not part of the community, you want to get in on it, there are links to our Discord. Wherever you're listening to this, you can find us on Spotify, though, same caveat, the Spotify link always seems to be behind the other publication dates for whatever reason, but I don't know that there's very much we can do about that. So, enough about Jank Diver Gaming and how awesome we are. Let's go ahead and talk about Khans of Tarkir, and just right up front, to you guys, what is your relationship with this set? Do you have any experience with Khans? Do you have any memories of it? Is this a new thing coming to you when it drops on Arena? What's the relationship with Khans of Tarkir for you guys?
So Khans is actually a pretty special set for me. I was in college at the time, and it was the last time that I really got to semi-consistently play Paper Magic to draft. After that, I mostly was playing on Moto until Arena came out, and didn't really have a lot of the quote-unquote the gathering, right, where you get to go to the card shop and hang out with the guys. So Khans was like, not in addition to being just an incredible set and one that I love for the gameplay reasons, there's a lot of memories there of being able to actually go out to the card store, card shop and play with people. And that was like the last time, I think that was the last set I got to actually do that in relatively consistently.
Chris, I know you kind of started picking Magic back up, I want to say around Ixalan, Rivals of Ixalan. Do you have any experience with Khans of Tarkir?
Back when we were doing drafts and drafts at Resident Culture on Central Avenue, drafts and drafts being the get drunk and draft a set group that kind of actually just resulted in all of this in the long run. Somebody brought a box that they'd been sitting, I think it was that guy Andy.
It was Kyle.
It was Kyle. Brought a box they'd been sitting on for a really long time, and I pulled a back then Chris Drafting Classic, which was I was drafting a deck that I was convinced was open, and actually the person immediately to my left was also drafting it. Yeah, it did not go well. I attempted to draft Teamer. I think I saw like a really awesome Teamer rare early and just got married to it, which is 100% used to be my style.
Was it Savage Knuckleblade? Because I wouldn't blame you if it's Savage Knuckleblade.
I honestly do not have the foggiest clue, man.
Yeah, I was thinking of the same thing. Shout out to Kyle, awesome guy, who was a regular part of that community, but he brought his own Khans of Tarkir box he'd been sitting on for a while for us to draft. I was wondering if you remembered anything about that, because I, for the life of me, can't remember what I drafted or what anybody... Like, I don't remember anything about that experience, other than I think Kyle opened, like, a Blood Crypt, or not a Blood Crypt, but a Bloodstained Mire, and was, like, happy enough with that or something like that. But yeah, Chris's mantra during the draft seasons was, I really shit the bed in pack 2. Like, just no matter what we were drafting, no matter how awesome his deck was, just he would finish up pack 3 and be like, man, I really shit the bed in pack 2. Like, and then just have a completely functional deck every single time.
That might be a little generous. I think occasionally I did, in fact, shit the bed, but...
It's okay. We all have those memes, right? I've said plenty of times that if I don't say I train wrecked a draft, I have 0% chance of going 3-0 in our Q drafts.
That's my favorite when people are like, yeah, I just don't know what happened. And then they just have a fully functional, like, 8 out of 10 or something. And I'm like, okay, whatever, man. But yeah, drafts and drafts. That was a good time. We should talk a little bit more about that at some point. I don't know how much there even is to talk about it, but as a predecessor to Jank Diver Gaming as a whole, like, that was a fun little experience. Just real quick, before we get into details about the set, I think Teld and I have discussed this a couple times, but it is a little apprehensive to go back to a set this beloved in 2023, 2024, because we now live in the data age of Magic, right? Mm-hmm. And what that means is that there's just overflowing information out there about what is correct, quote unquote correct, and what is not correct for any given limited format that's on Arena, because of things like 17 lands and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit worried that we're going to get this set that everybody loves, Khans of Tarkir. It's like, the poster child for great limited sets. But then the data is going to come out 2 weeks into the format and show that, oh, this set is actually horrifically balanced. The things that you remember about the set don't really work the way you remember them working, and it's so obvious that you should be drafting Mardu, or you should be drafting Jeskai or something like that. Whatever. Abzan, I think, is probably the one that comes to mind as one of the better, 3-color pairs. And then people are going to be like, oh, actually, maybe Khans isn't one of the best sets of all time. And it's fine for people to reevaluate, but I hate that the data influences where people land on sets so much that I'm a little apprehensive to get our hands on data for this set. And on top of that, if you look at the set, we'll talk about, like, the power level is weak by comparison to a 2023 limited set. So, Chris, you might remember, in fact, I think you were the one who told me, going back to Dominaria 2018, if you draft it in 2023, which is a set that we loved, it feels weak, especially at Common. It feels weak by comparison to a Fire design set, and it might feel that way for Khans as well. So a little bit of apprehension there.
To draw a parallel there, when you look at the data, because we looked at the trophy rates for various decks in different formats, everyone remembers Dominaria being extremely well balanced. That was our play pattern experience. But the data just says Blue-Red Wizards is, like, by far the best deck in that format by, like, a noticeable, I think it was over 10%, right?
I think it was pretty well established that Blue-Red Wizards probably was the best deck, but I didn't realize the data suggested that it was, like, insanely better than everything else,
That's what I mean, is that, we knew Blue-Red Wizards was very good, but the degree of dominance the data suggests that deck has is different than what we remember. And I could see the same thing happening with the Mardu decks, especially because I remember them being good. I remember the Warriors deck having a very strong curve relative to other decks. And it's possible that Mardu or Abzan, these sort of black-white shells, just run people over because they've got a 3-2 that buffs your whole board at Uncommon.
Yeah, and asterisk next to that, I'm assuming this is going to be offered in Best of 1 and Best of 3, and Best of 1 is just, like, in my opinion, a perversion of Magic sets and does not translate well to sets that were designed 10 years ago. So I'm going to take the data with a grain of salt, especially in Best of 1, and I personally will probably be big jamming Best of 3 because that's how I enjoy playing Magic. But yeah, I would be lying if I said I'm a little bit worried that this set is going to come out, and personally I might not enjoy it as much because, as much as we like to rail on fire design and how that's affected Magic, like, it is fun to open a bunch of good commons in your limited set and have multiple picks that are actually good for your draft deck, rather than Khans of Tarkir, which is going to be your best common in the pack is probably going to be like Alabaster Kirin or something like that, which is like a 2/3 vigilant flyer for 4 mana or something like that,
Right. Yeah, this is a set where there was, at least back in the day, a 0/5 green card with an activated ability in black that dealt 1 damage.
Archer's Parapet.
Yeah, and that is a very playable card in the set based on nostalgia. Again, the data probably is going to say that card's terrible, but I remember seeing and playing a lot of that card, and that's kind of the power level difference we're discussing here. Is that they're just, it's wild. It is extremely weak relative to what you're going to expect out of a modern Magic set.
Hopefully the data just shows that it is like the most balanced set of all time or something like that, because I think that's why people love it, is they remember it as being balanced. You've got these 5 clans and you've got the morph thing tying it together, but the clans all felt like if you ended up in one of those clans, you had a viable deck. But
yeah, and there was also, like, I remember playing 4 and 5 color decks where you were splashing morphs, and you could also play very linear aggro decks. I remember it being just the most open and balanced a format has ever felt, but I don't know if the data is going to back that up.
Exactly. So we'll see how that pans out. But let's go and get into some basic info here. Khans came out in 2014, so September 2014, which is just shy of 10 years from the recording of this video. It was the first 3-color set, or focused 3-color set, since Shards of Alara, which I don't even know when Shards came out. And this was the set that was focused on the wedges as opposed to the shards. Before the wedges came around, we didn't have names like Jeskai and Mardu and stuff like that. People used to call Jeskai American Control or British Control or French Control or something like that, because red, white, and blue. People used to call Abzan Junk, which I think was supposed to be a play on Jund, just worse Jund or something like that. And then you had things like Bug Delver and Rug Delver for Temur and Sultai. But now we have names and we use those names. And I do think, you guys feel free to weigh in, I think Magic does a pretty good job with these like clan names, to the point where we still use those names, and I don't know, it feels good to say Mardu, Sultai. Like, if you say Mardu, I immediately think red, white, black. Like, I don't know, something about the naming conventions with Magic just kind of works when it comes to these guild systems and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when they first announced them, people memed on them pretty hard. They were making fun of them as being weird sounding, and very quickly the community as a whole adopted them, and people started like identifying with the wedges pretty hard. I think in particular though, Temur and Jeskai, I don't know, there's something about the way those names sound that just like is very evocative for some reason of the colors that they represent. I can't exactly explain it logically, but like emotionally, those two resonate really, really hard for me. Although all 5 of them are very good names, I think, in the long run, even if they were made fun of at first.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the guilds from Ravnica, City of Guilds, do you think, like, they came out with, like, Golgari and Simic, and people were like, wow, these are dumb names? Like, I'm sure that's happened every time a guild-related set has come out, right? Or Shards came out, I'm sure people were like, Bant? What's Bant,
I've always thought it was kind of funny that some of the guild names that we use to refer to 2-color pairs actually contain more syllables than just saying, like, blue-white.
Yeah.
Yes, Selesnya.
To Alara's credit, Jund and Grixis both sound metal as hell. Like, those sound like things you'd see on the cover of a metal album.
Jund.
Bant is the only 3-color pair where I'm like, that one doesn't quite hit the same for me, but Grixis, it just sounds good to say. It's those duosyllabic words, right? Sultai, Mardu, Temur, Jeskai, like, they're all just duosyllabic, they just sound good. And it's also worth noting, Khans of Tarkir was the last 3-set block. We were talking about this before the show, but Teld, I'm going to throw this to you real quick. It might actually be worth going over for some listeners what the old block structure was. People who have played since 2018, Dominaria, when they made the shift, have only played with sets that are self-contained and never played within the block system. So can you go over the block system and how it applied to Khans? Because Khans did something a little bit different with the block system.
Right. In the olden days of Magic wasn't just individual sets. They would announce what was called a block. And a block was going to be one large set, like what you would imagine today, just a regular set that introduced the plane or brought us to the main events of the story or whatever. But then there would be some number of supplemental sets. Sometimes it was one, sometimes it was multiple, but done differently. But the standard was that you'd have 2 small sets that would each slowly work their way into the draft environment. So, for example, with Theros, you started with triple Theros, and then you had the second set, was it?
Born of the Gods.
Yeah, Born of the Gods, right. And you draft 2 Theros and 1 Born of the Gods. And then when the third set was at Nyx, Journey into Nyx, you drafted 1 Theros, 1 Born of the Gods, 1 Journey into Nyx. And so you drafted the base set for an extremely long time with small tweaks being made to these small sets. And part of the reason they got away from that is that generally speaking, these small sets did not improve the draft environment. They just made things worse, and they didn't really flesh out mechanics as well as you might think they could have, having 3 sets to iterate on them. That being said, Khans was one of the different ones, the interesting ones. So the plot of Khans is basically the Khans overthrew the originally it was dragons that ruled the plane of Tarkir, and the humanoids overthrew the dragons, and then they took over. And so the first set in Khans is the current timeline. Then, if I remember right, Sarkhan goes back in time and keeps Ugin from dying, because I think Ugin was dead. Fate Reforged is essentially like we changed fate, right? We changed history. And so then they released the third set, which was Dragons of Tarkir, where the dragons are now in charge. And, it's kind of a mirror of the Khans of Tarkir set. It's a pretty mediocre set overall. But it was an interesting concept. Problems being Dragons was extremely mediocre. It was a 2-color ally pair set, so it wasn't 10 colors. It was just the 5 dragon clans that were basically the wedges, but with all the cool factor removed. And then Fate Reforged is infamously one of the worst draft environments of all time that actually took triple Khans and just made it actually awful with 1 set. So those 2 things together, it was a cool idea again, because you drafted Khans, Fate Reforged, and then you drafted Fate Reforged, Dragons. It was kind of this timeline thing. So that was very, very cool conceptually, but definite 0 out of 10 did not stick the landing in terms of execution of either of the following sets. But they did, that basically made every set a mess. And that's the reason why now we have these sets that are just 3 of a set, and then we move on to the next set, and each set is a fully fleshed out product.
Which has been a fantastic change, right? I think you guys would both agree that's
yes.
been for the best.
I really have a difficult time parsing, it's interesting, I guess, conceptually, but it's such a convoluted way to create draft environments, because by the end of it, you've got 3 different sets washing around, and some of the sets are appearing in a different density of the overall cards drafted than they were the previous time. I just don't know how they ever imagined they were going to be able to balance that well, or play test what was going to be happening. It just, I don't know. I'm not trying to shit on the idea or whatever. It's it's interesting from a design perspective, but I just feel like you're creating a puzzle for yourself that's impossible to solve. I've
heard some complaints around the consistency of modern sets just being a little too homogenized, but it is a golden age of limited relative to the chaotic mess that was the pre-Dominaria time.
So Khans was the last 3-set block, even though it wasn't all drafted together. My favorite thing about Khans, I think the time travel thing is actually kind of interesting, where you had Khans, which was the original timeline, and then you have Dragons, which is the altered timeline, and you have Fate Reforged kind of setting those apart. My favorite thing about this is a card called Summit Prowler, which, speaking of bad commons, this is 2 red for a 4/3 vanilla, which is just a card you played and you were happy to play. 4 mana, 4/3 vanilla that's double pipped is just kind of what are we doing here? Khans of Tarkir has this card, and then Dragons of Tarkir also has this card, but with dragons photoshopped into the art. So it's just the same exact card, but one of them has dragons to show hey, look, things are different in this timeline.
If I remember right too, they changed the flavor text where it goes from referencing how powerful this Yeti is to it being essentially just a piece of meat.
There are a lot of really cool things, the parallels. You look at Zergo Helm Smasher in Khans of Tarkir, and then you've got Zergo Bell Striker in Dragons of Tarkir, which is the little wimpy Zergo that's being controlled by the dragons and stuff like that.
I just want to go ahead and throw this out that I am really confused how Khans has been so unbelievably popular, and yet we have been stuck with Dragons as the set of the plane, and we haven't returned to it in almost a decade now.
2025 has a confirmed revisit to Tarkir.
All right.
So we will be going back, but it's going to be under the umbrella of the Dragons timeline because, you know, from a Vorthos perspective, everything was altered. So we're going back to Dragons of Tarkir, not necessarily Khans of Tarkir, so we're going to have to see how that plays out. So we don't need to get into... part of the reason we're not doing a set review for Khans, by the way, is it's a known factor. Everybody kind of knows the cards that are good, but I don't want to get into the mechanics that aren't really cube relevant here. So Raid, Ferocious, and Outlast, those are fine limited mechanics. Raid even made a return in original Ixalan as the pirate mechanic, which I thought was kind of a cool way to use that.
I don't... Hang on a second. I don't necessarily agree that Outlast isn't relevant for cubes. I think Outlast is actually a pretty big deal for cubes with +1/+1 counter themes, right?
Well, we've played Outlast cards in the Peasant Cube, right? There's the one that gives first strike. There's the
I think Outzan Falconer is probably the most powerful of the bunch, right? Because it can just
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. So just to kind of make it more accurate, what I'm saying is the Outlast cards themselves are actually kind of fine for +1/+1 counter synergies, but the Outlast mechanic is like very slow. If you're not using it to bolster like your +1/+1 counter decks, then your Outlast cards as like standalone cards are just extremely slow, right? Because it's a tap ability and stuff like that. But you're absolutely right that like there are cards with Outlast that are actually quite good, like Abzan Battle Priest and Einok Battlekin and Abzan Falconer, I think, is the big one. But it almost doesn't matter that Abzan Falconer has Outlast, right? It's just that it's a +1/+1 counter lord.
Yeah.
Prowess, though. Prowess was actually introduced in Khans of Tarkir, and it was an attempt to make a Spellslinger mechanic that influenced combat, and I think worked out very well. At the time, it was a clan mechanic for Jeskai, but it was reintroduced in Magic Origins, where it was announced that it was going to be an evergreen mechanic, or at least a deciduous mechanic. It went away for a little while, and then came back, and now we just have Prowess whenever they want to use Prowess, and it's just a good mechanic, right? It's good enough for Cube on the cards it shows up on, to the point where we actually get, like, Prowess Lords now, in things like the new Narset, and we mentioned the Leonin Light Scribe before this video, which doesn't technically use Prowess, but it might as well. I don't know, we can't gush about Prowess, but this is just a nice, clean mechanic that ties together combat with spellsling and stuff.
Yeah, just always, from the first iteration, it's just been a good mechanic. It's always been played really well, but never managed to be broken. So, yeah, this one, as far as mechanics go, is kind of a slam dunk.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk to you guys about Delve, because one of the big impacts with Khans of Tarkir coming to Arena is that we're going to get the Delve spells for the first time for our cube. You know, people have been playing with Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time and the other good Delve spells for quite some time now in paper cubes and in, Eternal formats where it's legal and stuff like that. But this is the first time that we're actually going to have Delve cards in our own cube. For what it's worth, Delve was actually not new with Khans of Tarkir. It was borrowed as one of the Future Sight mechanics that only appeared on one or two cards. It was used as the Sultai mechanic. I want you guys to talk to me real quick about Delve in the context of Cube. Beyond, if it's just Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, just tell me it's Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. But Delve is really interesting to tackle, and it's a conversation we have to have for our cube, because there are diminishing returns on how many Delve cards you can actually put in a deck, which means that there are diminishing returns on how many Delve cards you can use in a cube effectively. So where's your excitement level at on the Delve cards? How do you think they're going to perform in our cube? And do any of them beyond Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time really appeal to you guys?
In this particular set, Tassiger is not in this set, right?
No, neither is Angler.
Neither is Angler. Okay, well, in that case, it is pretty much just Dig and Cruise. To your point, they get worse the more of them you're playing. So I don't even know. I mean, this is a conversation for us to probably have off air, because we could probably spend a lot of time talking about it. But, for me, the biggest question is, do we need to run Cruise and Dig? For a couple of reasons. A, we don't have, the density of cantrips that we'd like to have, the most cantrips we'd probably maximally want to play in the section. And we also don't have Thought Scour or Mental Note. And they did a remaster of the set where Thought Scour was originally printed, so I doubt we're going to see that anytime soon. So not only do we not have the density of cheap cantrips as a percentage of total cards in the section that a lot of other cubes might have, but we don't have the ones that are the best at filling your graveyard. So I don't know if we'd run both. Yeah. Murderous Cut, seems okay, but you have to exile 4 cards from your graveyard to get it to be cheaper than Doomblade. Now, granted, it is just destroy target creature. You don't lose any life. There's no conditions or anything like that.
I think for a long time, Murderous Cut was like approaching premium removal, but I think our removal spells are, I mean, like, compare that to Pylon. And I know that they have different mechanics for reducing the cost, but like Pylon destroys Planeswalkers and Scries as well as being cheaper natively.
But does Murderous Cut get better in environments that have, like... So typically, Reanimator and higher power cubes is facilitated not with stuff like, Ransack the Lab that's just like dumping cards in it's usually just facilitated with discard outlets, right?
Yeah, you'd rather play Bone Shards in that environment.
Right, so like, even Reanimator decks, are they filling up the graveyard all that much?
No, and I think part of your hesitation here, too, is in our environment, like, there's just going to come a time where you have to cannibalize your own Gutter Bones out of the graveyard, or your own Skyclave Shade out of the graveyard, or your Croxa, or whatever. Murderous Cut plays actually kind of poorly in graveyard decks that aren't just doing a turbo self-mill thing, because you are going to run up against your other graveyard payoffs and have to, like, delve those away to actually cast your your Murderous Cut, or you're delving away the other stuff you were planning to use to bring Croxa back and stuff like that. So they are at odds with each other, which is an interesting thing for Delve, because I think Delve's role in Cube is that it's often at odds with graveyard stuff. You would think it plays well in graveyard decks, but it's actually like better in decks that don't have a graveyard component or don't plan on using their graveyard for other stuff.
Also, the more you're using your graveyard, the more likely your opponent is to bring in some sort of graveyard hate. So, like, having a Dig Through Time or a Treasure Cruise in a deck that otherwise doesn't care about their graveyard means that the opponent has to make a decision. Whereas if you're just playing a graveyard deck and you've got Hooting Mandrills in your deck, they get to double whammy you and they take out your graveyard recursion stuff and your Delve spell no longer works.
Yeah, I mean, there's just diminishing returns. Like, I remember, this was a long time ago, but I was playing a red-black Dreadhorde Arcanist deck in our cube that also had Croxa and Phoenix of Ash and Grim Lavamancer in it. And it was just like one too many cards that cared about graveyard resources, I think. You really have to be cautious about playing too many.
Too many chefs in the kitchen, as it were.
Pretty much, yeah, or like 4 people all trying to cook dinner for one person with, with one meal's amount of ingredients.
In addition to hard to imagine things, like there was a time where Hooting Mandrills was a constructed playable Magic card. Whether if you're a modern Magic player, I know that probably sounds insane. And like I don't think it fits our green section at all. So I do think for the purposes of our unrestricted cube, at least, the only cards that matter here are Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise. And while if we only played one of them, we'd probably play Dig Through Time just because of the play patterns on it. It is impossible for me to look at Treasure Cruise and not just get giddy. I love that card so much.
Historically, those are the 2 cards that do see play in cubes, right? Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise. And Murktide Regent can make it into some cubes. I don't see Murderous Cut anymore. I don't see Hooted Mandrills. Maybe there's some other supplementary product Delve card that I'm not thinking about. Gurmag Angler is like a popper constructed card that matters quite a bit, but for the most part, we're talking Cruise and Dig Through Time, and it'll be a good question off air to talk about whether we want one or both or neither or something like that.
I think Murktide Regent probably has to be the best Delve card that exists, right? I mean, it's
Treasure Cruise. Sorry. Murktide Regent is good, but Treasure Cruise literally broke Constructed. Like, it got printed, and Constructed literally started revolving around it in literally every format it was playable in.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's probably true. It probably is Cruise. Like, if you unban Cruise today, I imagine Cruise would have a bigger impact than Murktide Regent, though. Murktide Regent is like a defining card of Legacy and Modern right now, which, Modern Horizons. Thank you. I do want to talk about Morph real quickly, though Morph does not translate very well to Cube. These hidden information mechanics like Foretell and Morph just don't work in Cube, unless the card you're talking about is just like a strong enough standalone card that it doesn't matter that your opponent can discern the information. But one of the things people love about Khans Limited is the way Morph played out. And if you don't know, before my time even, the original execution of Morph was known to be really poor because the way the cards were designed, they were just a bunch of gotcha creatures that could flip up for like 2 or 3 mana and just eat whatever you attacked with or eat whatever you blocked with. But they introduced this new rule when they brought Morph back for Khans called the 5 mana rule, where nothing, if you attacked your opponent's into an opponent's Morph with a 2/2, your opponent could not come out favorably in that exchange for less than 5 mana. So if they had 4 mana up, they could flip their Morph up, but their morph wouldn't be a 3/3 or anything that could eat your 2/2 for free without losing their morph too, or leaving behind just like a big defender or something like that.
Yeah.
So that made it a little more safe to figure out how to attack around morphs and attack into morphs and stuff like that. And it played out really well. I think this is probably, besides the 3 color pairs, morph is kind of the glue that held Khans together, because it just gave this colorless thing that made, all the 3 color things make sense. It just unfortunately does not translate into a cube environment particularly well. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think there's even a standalone morph card in Khans that is good enough in like our unrestricted environment just on its own. There's not one that gets there.
Well, morph as a mechanic is a relic of its time, right? Like you could not put a 3-mana 2/2 into any fire design format and it'd be playable. If they want to bring morph back, they're going to have to bring it back as like a 2-mana 2/2. It's going to have to be, well, we've already used megamorph, so we'll have to come up with some sort of new word for it, but,
Megamorph. What a joke. Fun aside there. Did you know Megamorph, when it came out, was the worst rated mechanic of all time? Like, period, all time, worse than banding, worse than Rampage. Like, people hated Megamorph.
Still do. So for those of you who run around, Dragons of Tarkir has a mechanic called Megamorph, and it's literally just morph, but they come in with a +1 counter and they flip. That's it.
Yeah, mega.
They're mega, yeah.
Look how big my creature is.
Yeah, it's... Morph is just one of those mechanics that if you've only played modern retail sets is going to look really janky. And I'm afraid that the data is going to tell us that Morph's actually not that good, but it's hard for me to imagine that given how much my experience with Khans revolved around Morph. Trying to suss out whether your opponent's face down creature, like their face down 2/2 was either a 0/5 wall or like a 5/6 that was going to ruin your day was an absolutely awesome, super fun shell game to play.
I personally dislike it, but I understand why people enjoy it.
Well, why do you dislike it? That's something worth bringing up.
It kind of reminds me of like Secrets in Hearthstone. It's like, ooh, like what did they play? I don't know.
Did you know? Oh, you don't like Secrets in Hearthstone when you played, huh?
I played Secrets Mage. It was like the closest thing that the game had to like instant speed interaction. I don't know. First of all, I don't like a 3-mana 2/2.
Fair.
I don't like a 3-mana 2/2. But I just didn't like the one time I did play the set. I just didn't really enjoy how many more creatures there were. Just like, oh, there's another 3-mana 2/2. Like, what does it do? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm just not a big fan. Like, I like things to be. If they're not going to be heads up, I like for them to be hand in hand. I can't really articulate why. Like, I'm not taking a position. Yeah. I'm just saying it doesn't like spark joy for me.
Yeah, no, I get that. It sparks a ton of joy for me, but one thing to consider is in this format with Morph, just as like a quick little draft tip, is that bears are better than normal because they trade with your opponent's 3-mana creature if they want to block, and 2/3s are awesome because they profitably keep your opponent from attacking with their morphs.
Yeah, and I can't like sit here and tell Chris he's wrong for not liking Morph. Morph's not my favorite mechanic of all time or anything, but I think part of the glory of Khans is that the entire set is designed with Morph in mind. Like, they know that you're casting 3-mana 2/2s, and it's a lot more palatable to cast a 3-mana 2/2 when every single game you're also expecting your opponent to play 3-mana 2/2s. If you look at the normal Khans battlefield by like turn 4, both players are at 21 life because of the tap lands, and the battlefield consists of 2 face-down 2/2s on both sides of the battlefield.
Glorious Magic game.
Like, that is just every single Khans game is like, do nothing on 1, do nothing on 2. Here's a morph. My opponent plays a morph. I'll play a morph. My opponent plays a morph. And then, like, once you get to turn 5, that's when the morphs start flipping up and stuff like that. But probably don't need to spend too much time on this otherwise because, again, it's not a relevant cube thing. I can't even think of a morph creature outside of Khans of Tarkir that's, like, cube playable. Maybe Exalted Angel.
Didn't people... I feel like you used to see... God, why am I blanking
Dim Protector?
On this card? Well, so there is Den Protector. That's one. It doesn't look like it's in this set, but there was like a blue morph that like countered a spell or ability when you unmorphed it. I think people that used to show up in cubes a long time ago. Oh, Stratus Dancer. Stratus Dancer, like a long time ago, used to show up in the occasional cube.
Yeah, that was Stratus Dancer was like what we were using for blue tempo decks. That was our tempo plant.
Right. Yeah.
The problem with that though is like if you present a list to me that has Stratus Dancer in it, and like I look at that list ahead of time and I see that there's no other morph other than Stratus Dancer, right. I'm just going to know that you have Stratus Dancer every time you play a morph, and I'm going to be able to play around your negate, right?
It's the same thing with Foretell, right? Like when we have Foretell cards currently in the cube, but when you foretell them, you know roughly what there's only one or two, you know, there's not much.
Yeah. But the difference is if you foretell Behold the Multiverse, like who cares? You're going to get your draw spell. Mm-hmm. But if you foretell Stratus Dancer, or I'm sorry, if you morph Stratus Dancer, it's like I'm just not going to run into that. Sure. Like you can cast your Behold the Multiverse, you know. So yeah, morph does not translate well to environments that don't have other morph creatures. So that means you just don't see morph in cube. And like Chris said, you cannot cast a 3-mana 2/2 in cube and expect for things to go even remotely okay. But this is actually part of a bigger conversation about how, as much as we love Khans of Tarkir, as much as everybody loves Khans of Tarkir, the set has been power crept to like all holy hell, right? We were looking through the set. We knew we were getting Khans for the past 2 months, and we're like, well, what cards are we going to get? And it's literally like less than 10 cards in the set that are even cubable by modern standards. So if you look at a lot of things going on in Khans of Tarkir in terms of power creep, you've got the uncommon tri-lands. Well, now we have triomes, which are just better than those. You've got vanilla creatures. It felt icky to say that. You know, you've got vanilla commons and uncommons in Khans of Tarkir, and modern card design does not make vanilla creatures unless there's some sort of gimmick. You're going to see a card. It's going to be hilarious, actually, if you are a regular drafter on Arena, you're going to see a card in Khans of Tarkir called Awaken the Bear, which is 2 and a green for an instant that gives +3/+3 and trample. There is literally a 2-mana version of this spell in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and you're going to be drafting those sets literally back to back. So you're going to go back to the more expensive version of this same exact card. You're going to see commons like Shatter, Erase, Naturalize, Cancel, Act of Treason, which are all terrible and are like the bare minimum versions of these effects that you can get in a limited environment. We don't see Act of Treason and Cancel in limited sets anymore. We see Cancel with Upside or Act of Treason with Upside. And God knows you can't throw Shatter and Naturalize in limited sets anymore. I wanted to take a brief moment to touch on a card called Pearl Lake Ancient, which was like the control finisher of choice for Constructed for a while. And it's a 7-mana 6/7 with flash and prowess and a really dumb ability that lets you bounce a bunch of lands to bring it back to your hand if it's about to die.
Yeah, compare that to Hullbreaker Horror.
Yeah. Like, this card sucks. Like, can you imagine Pearl Lake Ancient in our unrestricted cube? It would suck,
and
right?
This card was you'd play like one copy of this and one copy of Ugin, and that was your control deck's finisher for like 2 years.
Yeah, you will never see Pearl Lake Ancient in a constructed format ever again. One of the big splashy planeswalkers in Khans of Tarkir is Sarkhan Dragon Speaker, which was like a $40 card when it came out. Constructed All-Star, it was quite good. It is laughable to compare Sarkhan Dragon Speaker to something like Chandra Torch of Defiance, which Tellet has noted only came out 2 years after Dragon Speaker. Like, we would never play Sarkhan Dragon Speaker in unrestricted cube, would we? Like, I just don't see it. 5 mana minus to deal 4 to something.
Isn't it? Like, I was thinking about it because I saw it and I was like, oh yeah, Sarkhan's sweet. And then it's like, isn't Magmatic Galleon just mostly better? It's like Sarkhan's just kind of a bad Glorybringer.
Yeah, I don't know. Chris, do you have any opinions on Sarkhan Dragon Speaker?
No, not really specifically. I just kind of wanted to call out, I think a lot of this is sort of adding up to show that what we've known for a long time, the best like effects from this era, a lot of them still hold up in modern Magic, but like none of the best threats from the era do. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of like indicative of where Magic design has gone. We've got effects that have held up. They probably wouldn't print a card like Dig Through Time now, would be my guess. But obviously they've been printing threats. Like a lot of these threats, you can probably not only find a threat that's better, but a threat that power crept the card from Khans that has since been power crept by yet another card.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I just wanted to note that. I think that what you're seeing here is just really classic. Threats have gotten a lot better. Effects, quote-unquote effects, kind of haven't.
To Chris's point, you cannot talk about Khans of Tarkir, and I know we've done it on the podcast before. We were talking about it as a comparison to Shieldred, but you cannot mention Khans without mentioning the actual literal GOAT Siege Rhino. This is what Magic power creep looked like in 2014 with Siege Rhino. Like 4 mana, 1 black-white green, 4/5 trample, drain 3 on ETB. At the time, just seemed like absolutely absurd card. And in the conversation for like best creature ever printed at that time, and now you would have to pull someone's leg to put a Siege Rhino in cube or something like that.
Yeah, Siege Rhino's a funny one. It's a funny one. Like, it's such a classic card, and like, I never even played with it, but like, everybody knows what it does.
It was the card. It was the face of Standard. Standard was just a bunch of Abzan mirrors, and it was awesome. Like, you were just ramming Siege Rhinos into one another, and it was glorious. You know, it's like, just compare this to Children.
Which we've done on the podcast before, so we probably don't need to. But, I mean, there is something to be said about the peak of, like, a Standard playable card being just kind of an overstated thing that has an ETB, and then it's just stats on the board, right? Whereas nowadays you would expect to get some kind of cascaded advantage off of your 3-color 4-drop or something like that. So I don't know, maybe Siege Rhino in retrospect was just fantastic Magic design, but at the time it felt like the sky was falling. 4/5 for 4? Like, what? And it has upside? Like, that's just not how cards were printed in my estimation. Coming into the game, I came into the game at 2013, so a year before Khans came out, and Siege Rhino like blew my little baby Magic mind.
Oh no, it blew all of our minds. It was like the most insane threat we had ever seen. We knew it was going to be good, and it exceeded all expectations. Like, this card was so good. There was a point where, I think I've mentioned this before, that people were literally splashing blue for a card called Bring to Light that could go get more of your Siege Rhinos. You would pay 5 mana to go get your Siege Rhinos.
I hate to do it to you guys, but you know what we have to talk about when we're talking about Khans, and I just thought of it now. We have to talk about the deck names when the fetches were around, and you could just play like 4 colors with no stipulations, and you ended up with things like Wet Mardu, and
Dark Jeskai.
Dark Jeskai, and Spicy Sultai, where you're splashing red into your Sultai deck. There was just like an era of the worst deck names I've ever heard in my life.
Yep, there was a bunch of really, really bad ones. One other point of clarification is Siege Rhino is the GOAT, but is not actually a GOAT. He's a pachyderm, just to be clear.
Thank you for the clarification, Del. Okay, let's talk about our cube for just a minute. We talked about the Delve spells a little bit. We probably don't have to get into that, but Khans of Tarkir also has Hardened Scales and Monastery Swiftspear, but those were already on Arena, so not big talking points, as well as the first printing of Disdainful Stroke, which we get every other set now. We talked a little bit off air about Seeker of the Way. Teld, what's your opinion on that one? This is kind of like a cool, almost Spellsy Matters white card, which is just not area that's really super supported in Cube, but we have found some success with things like Monastery Mentor and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of this card. It was pretty impactful in Standard in the Jeskai, like Mantis Rider mid-range decks, as well as the Jeskai Tokens deck, where it was just like a 2-drop that would basically always attack as a 3/3 lifelinker. That being said, for Cube purposes, like I think you can probably make your prowessy white section work if you support that. The problem is compared to Monastery Mentor, like when you put Monastery Mentor in your prowessy deck, it completely and utterly takes over a game if it sticks. Seeker of the Way is never going to do that, so you're ending up having this kind of off branch that you normally don't play in white, this kind of different game plan, but your payoff is much more mild. So while at Peasant, maybe if you support this sort of thing, especially if you've got a lot of spells, it can be really good. It is a good card. It kind of is more of a constructed card where it just ends up fitting into the style of deck you're going to be building when you're playing that sort of Jeskai shell anyways.
Is Khans the first plane/set where they kind of started playing around with these white non-creature payoff stuff matters cards?
I believe so, because we got Monastery Mentor in the 3rd set, right?
It was in Fate Reforged, but I want to say this has got to be the first time it was done as a theme. There might have been 1 or 2 like one-off spells, mattery kind of white cards before, but the introduction of Prowess, and I want to say Prowess was like tertiary in white, right? Like it was mainly a blue-red thing, which makes sense, but because of the way the set was structured, you got a couple white cards with Prowess. But yeah, I think the answer to the question is yes. That was the first time it was like intentionally built this way. Chris, I know you had to step away for a second, but I wanted to make sure you were the one who got to talk about Bloodsoaked Champion, which is a card that I think we've been excited to get for our card pool for quite some time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Bloodsoaked Champion, it's not. There's nothing fancy about it. There's not really like a whole lot to discuss. This is just like. Now, I dunk on poor old Gutterbones a lot, but I think that this is just like way better than Gutterbones, right? And in our particular card pool, like we're running Nested Shambler, as kind of like a 2 bodies for 1 mana for the sacrifice deck. But we'll probably just replace it with Bloodsoaked Champion, I would imagine, just because it's just a good aggressive threat if you're doing sacrifice stuff or not, and it also plays perfectly well in your sacrifice decks. I would imagine this is true for a lot of cubes. It certainly is the case in ours, is like, your sacrifice decks tend to have some kind of like aggressive elements anyway, because you're just playing so many like cheap creatures, and if you have Blood Art effects on board, you get paid when those creatures die, so you're kind of encouraged to swing all of your junky little creatures into your opponent's board, even if they have blocks. So being able to trigger the raid on this pretty regularly, I think, is going to be kind of easy. And I mean, I would say at this stage, after we get Bloodsoaked Champion, like I'm happy with every single card in our black 1-drop section.
Yeah, getting to replace Nested Shambler is pretty big, because in the way these sack decks work in our cube is that if you're playing mono black or black red, you're aggressively slanted, and Nested Shambler doesn't fit there. You'd much rather have Bloodsoaked Champion, I think. And then if you want to play a grindier, more mid-rangey style of it, you go white, and white's what gives you the card quality with cards like, you know, Wedding Announcement, Blade Splicer, that sort of thing that make multiple bodies but put a lot of stats into play. That's how you really get over the hump of not needing to be quite as aggressive, on top of getting some stuff like Rite of Oblivion as well. So really, I think in these sort of base black, where you're heavy black and you're trying to do the sack thing in that shell, you do want to have those aggressive starts, and Bloodsoaked Champion is awesome at that. It's also probably the easiest to recur. Like, the only one that's comparable, I think, is Cult Conscript, and that one still requires something to die, whereas you're much more easily able to just turn something sideways and bring back Bloodsoaked Champion.
This seems like the easiest thing to trigger. Yeah, I mean, what the Jackal Dread Wanderer, I think, is like fairly easy, because you tend to dump out your hand as well, but it costs more to do it. Like, you know, it never really feels good to spend 3 mana to bring Dread Wanderer back, you know? I want to go on record and say that I actually think Nested Shambler is like a perfectly serviceable little Magic card. I think that 2 bodies for 1 mana in black, if you're doing like a sacrifice small ball black creature thing, is like perfectly good. And it does some cute things with anthems like your Judith equipment. It's particularly fun with Transmigrant's Crown. But, you know, in cube, if you're running like a Macro Architect cube, you generally speaking just want to play cards that go well in the most different spots. And so having an aggressively oriented recursive creature is probably just a better use for that slot.
For sure. And just the comparison to Gutter Bones alone, like, it often is going to do the same thing Gutter Bones does, because a lot of the ways you get Gutter Bones back is by dealing combat damage to your opponent by attacking, and then you have to recast the Gutter Bones, right? So it's a 3 mana total investment, but Bloodsoaked Champion, like, you're already attacking anyway. And there's this cool little thing which, by the way, I know we're like an hour plus into the episode. I should really be reading these cards for people who don't know Khans of Tarkir by heart. So I'm really sorry that it's taken this long. But Bloodsoaked Champion is the black 2/1. I think it can't block, or it comes into play tapped or something like that. Can't block. And you pay 1 in a black to return it to the battlefield. But you can only do that if you've attacked with a creature.
Notably, the champion itself can count for that. So if you just ship the champion because you've got 2 Blood Artists in play, you can just bring it back and keep doing that.
Well, and there's a really cool thing too with Blood Artist where with Bloodsoaked Champion, a lot of blood in black, but you only have to fulfill raid a single time in a turn in order for this ability to be on. So you could technically attack with the champion, and then if your opponent just has a good block, you sack it, you trigger your Blood Artist effect, and then you bring it back, you sack it, you bring it back, you sack it, you bring it back. Like, for 6 mana, you can just cycle through the same Bloodsoaked Champion 3 times in the same turn to trigger your Blood Artists and your sack outlets. Like, if you have Yawgmoth on board or something like that, you can just have Bloodsoaked Champion be the same thing you're sacking over and over again for every 2 mana that you can dump into it, which is a cool little play pattern with that card. Chris, we talked about Seeker of the Way. I do want to get an opinion on Wingmate Rock real quick. Wingmate Rock, I think, is the de facto like best card in Khans of Tarkir for limited. It's just the number 1. I'd be surprised if anything else comes out in the data. But it is a 3 white 3/4 flyer, and it has a raid ability. If you attack with a creature this turn, when it enters the battlefield, you create another 3/4 flyer. And whenever the Wingmate Rock attacks, you gain a life for each attacking creature. So I wanted to get your opinions on how this card holds up in a cube environment, and specifically the card I would probably compare this to is Angel of Invention. Is it worse than Angel of Invention, better than Angel of Invention? Do you see this card being cubable at all?
Wingmate Rock? You know, I think that this is like a fine threat. I think, especially if you have a larger cube, like a 540. Some people go all the way up to 720 because they just really like that variety, or just want to play with as many cards as they can to make use of as much of their collection as possible. If you attack another creature this turn and then you're able to put another 3/4 flyer into play, that's pretty powerful. I personally think Angel of Invention is just a way better card all around. It can be blinked, it has token synergies, it creates multiple bodies, it anthems things, so it has immediate board impact if you curve into it. Like sometimes you just play Angel of Invention, you win the game on the spot. I wouldn't put this in the same camp as Angel of Invention any day of the week, personally, but I don't think that this is a bad threat by any means. It's just, it's not exciting to me, but I think Angel is like 20 times better.
Yeah, I think Angel of Invention is actively terrible, but also I think Wingmate Rock's problem is that your aggro deck isn't really interested in casting a 5-drop, right? Where this effect would be at its best because you're attacking. And if you're playing a mid-ranger control deck, you have to be in a spot where you're either ahead, right? In which case the Wingmate Rock isn't doing what you need your mid-range or control cards to do, which is keep you from being behind. And then if you're not, you've got to be in a spot where you can still throw away a card to get the trigger, because like just playing a 5-mana 3/4 is not good enough. You need the 2 bodies out of it. So it really relies on the raid trigger, but that's hard to do in decks that aren't kind of aggressively slanted, but just power creep has pushed down the cost of those. I think I'm very, very low on Angel of Invention, but I will say Chris has a point that you can play Angel of Invention and get attacks out of it that Wingmate Rock doesn't enable. Wingmate Rock's just really snowbally when you're already ahead.
That's fair. Yeah, raid is not a given either. You do have to be able to attack with a creature, and if you can't raid Wingmate Rock, it's obviously terrible. Angel of Invention is interesting because it's a card that really doesn't get played in the cube, but has applications in basically almost every white deck except maybe like hard control or something like that.
Right. It just does a bunch of different things. ETB trigger, produces multiple bodies, makes artifacts, gains life. It just does a bunch of stuff. I think it's a good card.
Yeah.
I know Teld's off of it, but I think Angel's actively a pretty good card.
I mean, white 5-drop is kind of
it's a tough spot, right? These days, like they've printed so many like 3-drop white cards that snowball games out of control that it's showing its age a little bit.
Yeah.
If you compare like the bang that you're getting for your buck out of like an Adeline to Angel of Invention, then like obviously there's no comparison. But as far as white 5s go, if you're going to play one, like I'm personally on Angel, and like there's also Avacyn, but Avacyn is a completely different card.
I think I'm trying to struggle to think of a deck that I would play Angel Invention over Archangel Avacyn, but that's not really a here or there conversation.
Yeah, I was thinking Sanguine Evangelist as a comparison to Angel of Invention, just the 3 bodies overall and the pump and stuff like that. But yeah, just wanted to touch on Wingmate Rock because I do think it's an interesting card for the card pool. Also, just kind of wasting time and delaying the inevitable conversation about these fetch lands, which we're going to talk about now. Okay, so the ally colored fetches, which were, I think, originally an onslaught from way back in the day. So these are not new with Khans of Tarkir, but they were like the first time they were reprinted in 15 years or something like that. They often get credited to Khans because they made them more affordable and stuff like that. But the fetch lands, this is the first time we're getting fetch lands for the arena card pool. And say however that affects different constructed formats, who cares? We're here to talk about cube. We're only getting 5 of them, so it's not a full cycle of 10. The other Zendikar fetch lands are not currently included. Without spending an entire episode on fetch lands, where are we at with these? I know people don't particularly like them for the implications that they have.
I think you need to be careful when you say people don't like them, because in this case, people only really refers to us who have to deal with the design issues of it. Because if I remember correctly, we asked this question and people were very excited to play fetch lands, right? Like there's been a lot of...
I love fetch lands. I meant you two. I meant you two specifically because I love fetch lands, and our conversations about these have led me to believe that you guys almost would prefer that they weren't coming to Arena at all.
That is more or less correct, yeah.
There's a 0% chance that we're not going to play them because I think we'd get crucified if we didn't. Part of what drives me nuts about them is like when you watch people draft Vintage Cube and it's like, oh, I'm playing like a Rakdos deck and I've got a Blood Crypt, so I don't even know the name of the fetch lands, but I'm going to take this like blue-black fetch because it goes and gets my Blood Crypt or whatever. Like I don't know why I don't like that. I think like I have just like a touch of autism. The fact that it's like a blue-black land and it's getting put in the black-red deck, like something about the way that just physically looks bothers the bejesus out of me.
It makes it harder to get fixing for color for all of your decks that are actually playing those colors, right? Because like the thing with fetches is that even monocolor players are going to take the fetch to A, speculate on a splash with like a shock, right? But B, if they're playing a monocolored aggressive deck, I know logistically it doesn't make a lot of sense because people have ran the numbers and deck thinning is not a meaningful interaction, but like people will do that. People are going to put fetch lands in their deck just to reduce the number of lands that they can draw into the late game. That's something that we know happens because we've watched people play Cube.
Well, that's only a problem if you straight up replace dual lands with fetches, right? Instead of adding the fetches as another layer of lands on top of the duals you're already playing.
So my proposition has been, I think Chris, hopefully, I'm pretty sure we talked about this and you agree with it, Chris, is that we should just include them as colorless lands because functionally speaking, anybody who sees them and they're remotely playable for that pile, like if you're in one of the colors or or you're early and you want to speculate, you're just going to take them. Fetch lands are going to go extremely highly, regardless of whether they should or anything like that.
We're just going to have to figure it out because at a certain point, like you run out of room to play lands. We're already playing like all of the triomes, 4 sets of duels, etc. It's also possible that they're closer to a two-color, like a true two-color land in our environment that they would be in an environment that has ABU duels, right? Because, like, as far as dual lands are concerned, the shocks are literally only going to hit, or the fetches are literally only going to hit shocks.
And
so,
triomes.
Like, maybe it's fine. Well, and triomes, too, right? But so, I don't know. We're going to have to figure it out, is my short answer.
Is there any concern that this is going to make multicolored decks too easy? Like, is that a concern of yours, or is that, like, fine? In your guys' estimation?
I'm always apprehensive of things that make multicolor soup decks easier to pull off. I don't necessarily know if the density we're getting of like 5 fetch lands, is going to radically change that. But I mean, it just as a matter of necessity will make it easier if you can put a triome and a fetch land that fetches that triome into your deck to make your mana work, right? You now got 2 sources of that triome, not one.
I think it actually doesn't concern me a ton, simply because, like, I think that the 5-color decks are good, but I don't think that the 5-color decks are, like, inherently more powerful than really focused, synergistic 2-color decks. So I think it's a problem if you have an environment where, like, the 5-color drafter taking quote-unquote all the best cards just has the best deck. But, like, the way that things work out in our cube, I think 5-color is more of, like, a strategy than it is, like, the pinnacle of power drafting.
No, I agree with that. I actually think the biggest concern is more with 3-color decks, just really enabling those to make sure that your deck is able to stretch to the 3rd color and really be able to play, your Slimefoot or whatever on curve.
Yeah, the more I think about this, the more that I'm leaning, like, we should just kind of go for it and see if that's what happens, then try to anticipate whether or not it's going to happen and design around that. Does that make sense?
We always were just going to go for it, I think. I think at the end of the day, we were just going to end up including them. We're going to figure out a way to put them in. And this isn't as concerning for me as something like Utopia Sprawl. There is the concern a little bit around, making multicolor piles a little easier, but like there's also the element that making less non-games of Magic by having good mana is also a benefit to the player base, right? So there is some element of it changes the draft a little bit in a potentially meaningful and interesting way, and it reduces the number of non-games because you are more likely to have 2 or 3 colors. So ultimately, I think fetches are probably an improvement. I'm just always apprehensive about it. It's one of those things. I don't like that you have to include. I don't like that you're forced to include them. I think is probably my biggest issue. Right? Is like you just have to play them. There's no real option not to.
I could live without them. It'll be cool to get them. People will be excited to play with them. If we weren't getting the fetches, I wouldn't have a problem with that personally.
I don't think any of us have ever been like, man, I sure hope we get the fetches. But now that we have the fetches, it's kind of like, well, we got to play the fetches. I do think they add a lot of like fiddliness to different strategies and stuff like that I appreciate that aren't like immediately apparent until you start playing with them. Like they give you a card for Delve, they give you a card for Kroxa.
You get to brainstorm shuffle.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a certain subset of cards that get better because the fetch lands exist, and I think that's usually fine. Brainstorm gets a lot better. You have cards like landfall creatures like Tireless Tracker and Lotus Cobra that suddenly are much better. Your Delirium cards, which are way more easier to enable because you can get a land into your graveyard easily. You have your domain cards, like we added Leyline Binding, which now are significantly cheaper and more consistent as like a 1 or 2 mana spell because you can fetch a Triome and reduce its cost. There are a lot of things that get better because the fetch lands exist outside of the fact that they're just fixing mana. Like, they just do a lot of fiddly things, and I think we'll see that. Like, we could even, I think we would need all 10 to consider this, but we could at some point consider, like, Crucible Worlds and Deathrite Shaman, in an environment that has these sorts of things. But
the thing is that if you want to maximize that, you start having to run like 2 sets of fetches, and then I think you start to really homogenize your kind of mana building. We're never breaking singleton, I don't think, at this point. So, if we haven't done it already, I don't think we'd be doing it for fetches, though I know a lot of people have moved in that direction of running like 2 sets of fetches and then, whatever else they're running.
I would never advocate for that. I do like that my Thoughtseize opponent is going to go fetch shock Thoughtseize and be at 15 when they win the game on turn 1 instead of 17 life or whatever.
The last thing I have to say about the fetches is that I would be a lot more excited from a design perspective to be getting them if there was like a green-black like lands deck that they had like cool gameplay applications in, then I'd be a lot more excited to be getting them. I want to be clear. I'm not like distressed that we're getting the fetches or whatever. I'm just like, it's not lighting a fire or anything.
Mm-hmm. With the addition of the fetches, outside of original duels, do we just have the best lands in Magic now in the arena card pool?
Yeah, right? Pretty much.
Are we missing a land cycle that we would die to get that we don't have?
I mean, it'd be nice to have the other half of the Horizon lands, but...
Yeah, but those don't exist, right? So.
Oh, yeah. For some reason, I was thinking Horizon Canopy was a cycle, but yeah, you're right. It's just one card.
The point being, the question basically being, do we have a comparable mana base to, a modern cube / legacy cube?
Yeah, pretty much,
minus
right?
Duels,
Well, let's see. We've got Pains, checks, fast, slow. We've got the cycling. We've got the bicycles, which I don't think that they ever finished that. Actually, Andy from Lucky Paper really hates the Triomes, partially because he's like, why didn't they just finish the bicycle lands?
We are still missing a few specific ones like Creeping Tar Pit, Celestial Colonnade type stuff, but those are more specific misses rather than like a cycle of cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just have them. And again, 5 fetches, not 10, but at some point the fetches become redundant. Like Chris said, a black-white fetch and a blue-green fetch might have the same function in your, black-blue deck, which is kind of weird.
It will annoy me. It will deeply annoy me until we get the other 5. I will be...
Yeah, the color identity... And this has been a conversation with Commander, too, for a long time, is if you're playing a format that's so closely tied to color identity, why can I play Wooded Foothills in my mono red deck? It doesn't aesthetically make any sense at all. And a lot of people would say fetch lands are one of the biggest mistakes that ever happened to Magic, and I see where they're coming from. Going back to Wet Mardu, Standard, while the fetches were around, was just nothing but 4-color piles for a very long time. You had your Siege Rhino, Jace, Vryn's Prodigy decks and stuff like that, or your Mantis Rider decks with black mana for removal spells and stuff like that. And it was just because the fetch lands existed in that environment, it was just so easy and so trivial to get the right mana for your 4-color mana base and stuff like that. And I can understand completely why people don't like that.
Specifically, wasn't it because you had fetches and shock lands available at the same time, or the bicycle lands or something like Tango lands, whatever they're called?
Yeah, I don't think it was shock specifically, but there was some cycle of duels from Battle for Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch or something that made it very easy for your fetch land to be a 4-color
because the first time around we had them in Standard was during Zendikar, the original Zendikar. They were played pretty heavily, but they were used in the way that they're intended, which was fetching basics of the color. We didn't have the dual land types available, and they were much more reasonable and fair there.
Yeah, and now we have Fetch Triome, right, which is something new within the last 2 to 3 years, which just makes it so that any environment that has fetches and triomes is it's extremely easy to get all 5 colors as quickly as you need to. Look at how, domain decks function in Modern and stuff like that. They just have 5 colors on turn 2 very easily. Granted, the mana bases do catch up to you when you're playing a bunch of shocks and a bunch of, tap triomes and fetch lands and stuff like that. So maybe it bolsters your aggro deck or something like that if your aggro deck needs a little push and people are just playing a bunch of fetches. But probably enough discourse about fetch lands there. We'll have a little more conversation off air about it, and you'll definitely see them pop up in our cube. But why don't we go ahead and wrap this up with just kind of a question. What's the lasting impact of Khans of Tarkir? It feels like we basically said throughout the course of this episode that Khans of Tarkir just doesn't live up anymore. It's just power crept out of existence almost, and the fetch lands aren't even something that Khans can necessarily claim for itself because those were reprints. So what does Khans of Tarkir have that still holds on in Cube that makes it relevant in Cube these days?
Delve. That's
Delve.
it. That's it. It's Delve.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for Jake Diver Gaming.
Well, there's one other card, okay? Monastery Swiftspear, up until the printing of Ragavan, was arguably the best one-drop in red ever printed.
Yes. Swiftspear is something that Khans of Tarkir can hold tightly and say, this is mine, this is good,
And like, Swiftspear is one of those cards that is in a uniquely powerful position in that it is very, very unlikely to ever be directly power crept out. I say that knowing that in the year of our Lord 2023, anything can happen. But it's hard for me to imagine them just printing a card, at least that could see played as many cubes as Swiftspear, because it's an uncommon.
It has been downshifted recently, which is why it's tearing up Pauper. Right. Like, it is the mono red card of Pauper now, because it was downshifted in a double master.
Right. So, I mean, that card's had a huge impact, partly because of its low rarity. And it was fantastic, and it still is very good. I mean, there's Bomat Courier is the only one that's like sees reasonable play that you can compare to. Obviously, Ragavan is much better, but if you're playing Ragavan, you're an insane person or in Vintage Cube. So,
I mean, you said in an episode recently, Ted, that Telled that hey Ted, how's it going? You said a Thraben Inspector might be the most cubed card of all time. Like, Monastery Swiftspear is knocking out that door.
Yeah, no, they're both very, very highly played cards. I mean, these are just really, really good designs, right? Like, Thraben Inspector kind of plays to a mid-range game while being playable in white aggressive decks. Monastery Swiftspear is the epitome of a red aggro card. It is just like, every cube is going to have some sort of red aggressive deck, because that's what red does, and Swiftspear just does that. It is the red smort card.
It's funny too that we actually already had this card because it was reprinted in Brothers War, so we would be extremely excited to get it if this was the first time, but we actually already have it, though the Brothers War art is like super inferior to the original art,
and then like Chris says, the Delve spells. Really, Treasure Cruise is the card that to me jumps to mind. Like, the world came to a standstill and just we all played Treasure Cruise for like a month. I remember playing, in Pauper, a lot of Pauper at the time, and just those blue red mirrors were just a ton of fun. They were so much fun.
How was it being facilitated? Was it being abused, or was it just like, oh, this is incredible value over a long game?
It was just incredible value when your decks are like the blue red decks in Pauper kind of played out like I think most of them were actual Delver decks. I played like a Kiln Fiend mid range deck, which was a little offbeat. The average game was like Mole Drifters and Delver of Secrets and like I forget what other creatures, Seagate Oracle, I think. And you played a bunch of cantrips and lightning bolts and burst lightnings, and you just played a ton of cards that just very, very cheaply cycled, and then you draw Treasure Cruise, and it was Ancestral Recall.
And it's funny because I said, what is the lasting impact of Khans on Cube? And Chris just immediately rattled off Delve, right? Which is what I think a lot of people would say. Like, quick, first thing that comes to mind when you think of Khans, Delve. But we're really only talking about, like, 2 cards, Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. The other ones are, like, worth having a conversation about. But it's more like the mechanic itself, Delve, just lends itself to, like, potential brokenness, like cost reduction, in general. That it's funny that there's only really 2 cards that are, worth having a conversation about, really, but it is such a big thing you think about when you think of Khans of Tarkir. A couple other claims to fame here. Prowess is a great mechanic. It was introduced in Khans. That's nice. The 3-color wedge names, as we talked about, stick. They feel sticky. They feel good to say.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone say Rug Delver since about a year after Khans came out.
Yeah. You see this too with like Streets of New Capenna came out, right? And it had new names for the shards, but nobody's calling Jun Riveteers. Yeah. Like, I swear to God, if you show up to like Commander Night and you're like, this is my Riveteer deck, I'm just gonna not play with you. Like, call it Jund or get out of my house. Also worth noting, this was the final 3 set structured block before they switched to the 2 set blocks with like Kaladesh and Aether Revolt or Ixalan, Rivals of Ixalan, and then they just switched to single set blocks with Dominaria 2018, I believe was the first time they made that conscious change.
Yeah.
Which is just something to note, not super important. But yeah, I mean, overall, you've got to note here, Khans of Tarkir is legendary, which is actually really funny to think about because in the course of this entire recording, we probably talked about less than 10 cards of note from the entire set. I mean, we could gush about some of the 3-color cards and how they performed in Constructed, how people were super on Savage Knuckleblade, and how important Mantis Rider was for a very long time. But from a cube perspective, Khans not adding that much these days.
Khans is sort of in one of those spots, kind of like the original Innistrad in a way, where, yes, the limited format was excellent, right? The limited format was really, really good. But the flavor and designs were so on point. It was like that. It was the first time, to my knowledge, we really got away from like traditional fantasy, because the whole thing with Khans is this like Middle Asia. It was like because like the Mardu were based on like Mongols and things like that, right? Like these different warrior tribes. You had like Jeskai monks and all of these different kind of thematic takes on that sort of region of the world was such a wild departure from what we were used to. Sort of like how Innistrad being the horror set was a really far, departure from our normal like high fantasy environment. Because it was so well done in terms of flavor design, it just stuck in people's minds because we didn't have a ton of that going on at the time.
Yeah, it's aesthetically pleasing. It's also a bottom up design for Magic, which I always enjoy their kind of bottom up designs rather than their top down designs. Where, yeah, it has like the Mongol influences and stuff like that, but for the most part, the world building is like purely Magic. World building. It's not drawing that much from outside influences.
Just an incredible set. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm gonna be honest, this is probably gonna be one of those times where I'm just gonna like not look at 17 lands and just play. Just gonna never open 17 lands. I'm just gonna be a full Tim data denier and just play.
I mean, I never open 17 lands, so it's easy for me. I was gonna ask Chris if I know he doesn't play a lot of retail limited these days, but are you gonna pick up any Khans drafts, or just does it not appeal to you at all?
No, I probably will, just because it is such a well-regarded set. It's a lot of people's favorite set. Yeah, I think I probably will play it just to check it out. I like you said, I don't play a lot of limited anymore, but I'll probably fire up a few of these.
I believe going into this set, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but this is my and your number one set of all time, right?
I have that written down somewhere, but yes, I believe currently I have that as my number one set. I want Chris to record a Khans of Tarkir draft so I can see his face the first time he plays a 3-mana 2/2 morph face down, and he's like, what is this garbage?
I'm actually a little bit concerned that it's going to be initially difficult for me to parse what I'm supposed to take, because if I go into a limited set blind these days, I know what the power level of cards is, roughly like what I think I should be getting for my mana, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a little concerned that I'm going to look at stuff that's good in the format and be like, why would I take that? That seems really bad.
Yeah, just keep in mind, like, a bear is good in this format, but getting on board on turn 2 is really good.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's hard to go backwards, right? We're so spoiled with the power level of sets these days, at common and uncommon especially, that you go back 10 years and you see a set where the best common in the pack is a 2/3 flyer for 4, and it's like, if you didn't play those sets, how would you ever recognize Alabaster Kirin as like a good common, And especially with morphs, because they start off as terrible cards, and a lot of them don't even look like they're that good when you flip them face up, The best morph in the set is Woolly Loxodon, at common at least. Well, Woolly Loxodon is a 6/7 for 7.
Yeah, there's that in the blue one, right? It's like a blue 5-drop,
glacial whatever.
Yeah.
Glacial Stalker or something like that. It's a 4/5 for 5. That's the card. There's no text on it. There's no other abilities. It has morph, but you're talking about a total investment of 8 mana for a 4/5. If I saw that in LCI, I'd be like, why would I ever play this card? But in Khans of Tarkir, it's like a premium common, So,
well, to be fair, in LCI, if it costs more than 1 mana and isn't a rare, you ask yourself why you're playing it.
I opened the floodgates. I shouldn't have mentioned LCI, but there we are. Yeah, I'm a little apprehensive, but at the same time, Shadows over Innistrad came back, the Shadows remastered, and even though it was like a pumped up version, I got a lot of joy out of revisiting that set, and that was from like 2015, a year after Khans or something like that, and I got really giddy playing that set. It brought back a lot of fond memories, and I feel like it played really well. It was a remaster, though, and maybe Khans could have used the remaster treatment, because there's a lot of unplayable crap in the set. It's one of those sets where you end up with 20 playables, and you have to kind of slot in 3 extra cards. Sometimes you play an off-color morph, you can't even flip face up because you just need another card. Like, dead serious, that's the kind of thing you have to do sometimes. But I personally thrive in environments like that, because I feel like I can extract the better cards from the worst cards and just have a better deck. Whereas in Modern Limited, everything's just kind of good. So sometimes I lose that edge.
Would you suggest that you're pretty good at diving into jank?
Yeah, I've dived in whatever.
He's dived into some dank in his day.
I've been diving into some dank these days, but don't tell my girlfriend. Anyway, let's go ahead and close this bad boy up. So, thanks to everybody out there, all 700 of the Jank Divers who are clearly listening to this. Thanks for being here. Remember, best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join the Discord server. Come draft with us, assuming the direct challenge bug lets you do that. At the very least, you can always draft. People seem to have a lot of fun just drafting sometimes, and even if the matches don't work out, usually one person can connect with somebody else, and everybody just kind of likes hanging out, almost like game store style. So even if you don't get your matches in because of the direct challenge bug, either A, hopefully that's fixed soon, or B, you still get to have fun drafting and playing some matches.
Isn't there some event coming up where if this direct challenge bug is still an issue, there's going to be like an absolute shitstorm?
Yeah, Twitch Rivals.
Twitch Rivals, yeah. So I don't know what Twitch Rivals is, but...
Me either. I just know that people were talking about it, and it is apparently a challenge where people have to direct challenge each other. So we'll see. It's either gonna be fixed or it's gonna be a complete mess, right?
It already derailed the Lords of Limited versus Limited Resources showdown thing, right?
Yep, definitely did. And I mean, a lot of people have had to take down their weekly events and stuff like that until this bug is fixed. And it does affect us. It affects us quite a bit. I mean, we can always get the draft in because that's done through draftmancer.com. Shout out to Senryoku. But we don't always get our matches in. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
When did it even start? I mean, it's been months now, right?
October sometime?
It's a long-lasting problem. But anyway, come attempt to draft the Unrestricted Cube with us on at 7:30 Eastern on Sundays. The Peasant Cube or our Specialty Cube drafts, we draft on 7:30 Eastern on Wednesdays, and we've had our European time slot, 2:30 Eastern, where we draft basically whatever cubes are up for grab. That's been kind of a little bit of a flex slot where we've been trying out a lot of different cubes, and it seems like it's been fairly popular. So a lot of different time slots on Sunday, and then 7:30 on Wednesday, and you can come hang out, if nothing else, just draft, play some matches, have some good fun. Unfortunately, Matcherino has gone on hiatus until at least early next year, so there won't be any gems available, but that was never the point of doing these things in the first place. You can find our socials, Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld on Twitch.tv/TeldTalks. We've got 2 more episodes coming up this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but we're going to do our year in review for our next episode. So we'll be talking about all of 2023 and how good Lost Caverns of Ixalan was. And then just a lot of exciting stuff. And then we'll see what we get into for a final topic for the year. But that's going to go ahead and do it. Thanks for hanging out and letting us talk to you, talk your ear off about Khans of Tarkir. Such an awesome set. Can't wait to draft it. And we will see you all next time. Okay, quick sign-off. Wanted to give some quick tips to people who might be drafting Khans of Tarkir for the first time. And it might be that I don't even have my tips on me anymore.
It's okay. We can just come up with some on the spot. So, if you are used to drafting Modern Limited formats, this is not that. If we didn't belabor that point enough during the main portion of the episode, cards that are grindy tend to be better. You have time to generate card advantage. I mentioned this in the episode, but contextually, some cards that maybe don't look so good are actually excellent. So there is, for example, at white common, I believe, there is a 2/3 with raid that makes a 1/1, I believe. Is that correct, Tim?
Yes, there was a functional reprint of that card in one of the Innistrad sets, but it's a Mardu Horde Chief.
Right. That card is premium. Puts multiple bodies into play that are warriors, so it'll help your warriors deck if you're playing that, but it also lets you block morphs really well. The morph shell game, assuming this plays out like it did in the past, is a really, really big deal. Like, we don't know for sure, but it was pretty common to skip turn 2 in this format and just play tap lands for the first 2 turns and then play a morph on turn 3. Because removal is really bad. Like, Throttle is a 5 mana, give something -4/-4, and that card is premium.
Yeah, you'll play that card. Rite of the Serpent, 6 mana sorcery, destroy target creature, make a 1/1. You'll play that. 6 mana sorcery speed, destroy target creature. Again, you're in the era of bad removal. And sorry, I had a list of, just a few bullet points real quick, but we'll come off the cuff. Your main goal is not to be necessarily a 3-color deck. What you want to be is a 2-color ally colored pair.
Enemy
that's
color.
Touching. Is it enemy color? So the fetch lands are
fetch lands are ally color, but because if you're in blue-red, you can pivot into either Jeskai or Temur, right? And if you're in white-black, you can pivot into Mardu or Abzan.
Yeah, so you'll see in the set the gold cards, the 2-color gold cards. There aren't cards for every single color pair. So you want to be in the color pairs of the 2-color gold cards so that you can pivot into one of the other clans that it touches. So for example, like Teld said, if you start off in blue-red, you can either go Jeskai if that's open, or you can go Temur if green is open, but you want to be base blue-red. What you don't want to be is a 3-color deck with an even split of blue cards, red cards, and green cards. That's just not where you want to be.
Yeah, it's also tap lands are extremely important in the set, even more so than normal, because the morphs are cards that you can cast for 3 generic mana. But one of the things you can do in this format is you can draft those multicolor tap lands that do 2 things. Firstly, it lets you splash for obviously bombs, but morphs as well that you just cast for colorless mana, and then later into the game, you say you're playing a green tap land and you've got one of the common 3-color things in your deck, and you can now splash that card, right? The other thing it does is it makes your opponent have to guess, because the more colors of mana you have available, the more things that morph could be.
The dual lands and the tri-lands are almost always better than the fetch lands too, for what it's worth. The fetch lands are okay, but they're actually worse than the tri-lands in this set because the mana fixing is so important.
Yeah, tri-lands are like windmill slam dunk territory.
Yeah, tri-lands are fantastic. 5-color is an achievable thing in this set. This is the only set in the entire time I've been playing Magic where I think the consensus with good Magic players was that this is an 18-land format. You can play 17, that's fine, but there's so much to do with your mana in the late game between morph and delve spells and stuff like that. There's a lot of draw spells. Consensus across the board was that this is an 18-land format. And I wanted to make a quick note on delve, which I think we mentioned here for Cube as well. You do not want to build a delve deck. Like the Jeskai deck, you can build a prowess deck. The Mardu deck, you can build a raid deck, but you don't want to be in Sultai building a delve deck. Like, you don't want to take every card with delve on it and put them all in the same deck. Ideally, what you want to do is just have 2 delve cards in your deck, because they really do rub up against each other. When you start eating your graveyard for one of them, you don't have the resources for the other one. So I would say maximum 3 delve cards in your deck and cap it off there. You don't want more than that.
Yeah, the kind of exception to that rule is, if I remember correctly, there's a blue removal spell that's not really overcosted. Murderous Cut, you're happy paying 5 mana for. You just jam as many copies of that card as you can in your deck. There's a few of them. Hooting Mandrills is kind of in that spot where like a 6 mana 4/4 is just kind of a playable card. You don't want to pay 6 mana for it, but if you get stuck paying 6 mana for it, it's not the end of the world. Just the power level difference here is pretty substantial. Now, the other thing to that is it means games are going to go longer, which means that you want to have some power in your deck. This is why drafting open, like drafting smart, is really important. It's much harder to force your way to a good deck. You need to read the room, especially to try to get the powerful rares that are in this format. There's cards like Dune Blast, which is a 7 mana Abzan card that you select a creature and then destroy every other creature. That card is bananas. Obviously, Wingmate Rock and Sarkhan are good, but there's a lot of 3 mana or 3 different color cards that you can splash, that you can get by being open and just staying, drafting the room correctly. You really cannot force in this format. It is very, very difficult to, unless you're forcing warriors and, you've announced to the table that you're going to do that.
Yeah. And my final note here was something about morph that people might not know about. There's a rule in Magic with the hidden information mechanics like morph and foretell, where if the game ends, you are obligated to reveal all of your face down foretell cards and all of your face down morph cards, basically as like an anti-cheating measure. You have to prove that your face down morph was a morph at the end of the game, so you have to reveal that information, which kind of sucks because you have to show them what your morphs were even if you never morphed them. That's basically a paper rule, but it translates over into Arena as well, which they didn't have to maintain that because Arena kind of prevents you from cheating in the first place, but they still have that rule. So if you're playing on Arena and the game ends while your opponent still has morphs on board, you can click the View Battlefield button and it'll turn all their morphs face up so you can see them, which actually works with Foretell too, which people might not know about. But if your opponent foretold a card and the game ends before they actually cast it from exile, you can go look at the battlefield and it'll turn their foretell card face up to prove to you that it was a foretell card. Basically just mimicking how it works in paper. So keep that in mind. You want to know what your opponent's morphs are. A lot of times games will end with morphs still face down on the battlefield. So you just want to go peek at what they were, and your opponent is going to know what yours are as well.
Yeah, and then the make sure you learn the morphs relatively quickly. There's a lot of them, and it is very important to know. I mean, obviously, Woolly Loxodon and Glacial Stalker are like two of the really important ones, but there's also at common a full cycle of the wedge color morphs. So we mentioned Ponyback Brigade, but there's one that's like a 3/4. I think it's a 3/4 flyer that loots, and there's like a 4/4 lifelinker in Abzan. So there are a lot of them, and those are ones that when I mentioned, staying open to splashes, those are really powerful. Those cards are all exceptionally good, as I remember.
There's also a cycle of uncommons that can morph up for free by revealing a card from your hand of the same color. And I'm going to assume if you're tapped out on Arena, you're going to get priority for those. So if your opponent's completely tapped out and they're getting priority while they have a morph face down, it's probably one of those ones that can morph up for free.
Now, notably, none of them do anything meaningful. The worst they can do...
one of them turns into a Death Toucher.
The worst they can do is trade for your card, though, is what I mean. You're not going to get 2 for 1 to buy these cards.
Yeah, exactly. One of them's like a 0/6 or whatever, and some of them aren't even that good. But what you can do if you're not familiar with the morphs is you can pull up Scryfall, and you can type in format, Khans, KTK, Oracle text or Oracle morph, and then filter by whatever color your opponent's playing, which is usually all of them, and you'll just have a snapshot of all the morphs in that color that your opponent could be playing. Doesn't matter, it's always Sagu Mauler. In my experiences, it's always Sagu Mauler. But quick tips with Tim and Teld on how to approach Khans of Tarkir, but hopefully that helps somebody out there.
Megamorph.
I really shit the bed in Pack 2.
Jundy Jund.
Not y'alls. Sorry, my southernness just came out there.
Dark Jess guy.
He's drived into some dank.